Order. I call to order today's Defence Committee evidence session. I am very, very grateful to our four esteemed guests. Welcome back to David Williams, the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Defence. We also have a welcome back to Lieutenant General Sir Robert McGowan, who is the Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff for Military Capability. Welcome also to Anine Blackmore, the Director General Finance at the Ministry of Defence, and also a very warm welcome to Andy Stark, the Chief Executive at the Defence Equipment and Support, and also the National Armaments Director. Before I delve further, I'd also like to put on record, Mr. Stark, our gratitude, our thanks to your good selves. The Defence Committee last week had the pleasure of visiting DENS Abbey Wood in Bristol, and we found that a very thought-provoking and informative visit. And once again, thank you to all of your staff there, to everybody involved for all of their hard work that they do. And as I mentioned, please do not let the difficult questions that we have to ask. As Defence Committee members, that's our job. But we are very, very grateful of their hard work to keep us secure in the UK as well as abroad, and their monumental efforts recently to mobilise to support our allies in the Ukraine. So moving or talking of questions, Permanent Secretary, at our last evidence session where you accompanied the Secretary of State, you told us that you expected to reduce the civilian staff by around 10%. That understandably caused considerable consternation among staff. So just to clarify, will this involve redundancies and or a recruitment freeze?
Thank you, Chair. Let me clarify my remarks at the last hearing. What I was looking to do was give the committee a sense, really, from a personal perspective, of the likely trajectory in terms of civil service headcount within the department. But just to be clear, no formal targets have been agreed within the department. We will work through a series of work strands in common with other government departments as part of the second phase of the spending review, looking at productivity, looking at efficiency, but to do that work on both a whole force basis, so looking at the right balance between colleagues in uniform, reserves, permanent civil servants, and contractor support. And the primary control, I suspect, will end up being a workforce budget rather than a specific headcount. So still quite a lot of work to do. Right. We will need to engage staff, engage trade unions in that work as it develops over the coming months. And as I said to the committee last time round, there will be areas of the civil service workforce where actually I think we want to see numbers go up. Digital is an example of that, partly because of the priority we're placing in that area, but also it gives us an opportunity to convert some of our current external assistants or temporary staff into permanent civil servants. So my personal sense is that we have probably peaked in terms of civil service numbers, and I would expect them to come down over this Parliament, but no formal targets have been agreed, and there's quite a lot of work still to be done.
Because Defence Committee members and I met with union officials as well. They were unaware of anything, so it definitely nothing has been agreed upon, nothing has been consulted upon. And also I wanted to inquire about how will you avoid losing scarce skills in a way that further increases temporary staffing and consultancy spending? How will you avoid doing that?
So to your sort of first point there, and actually just picking up on a specific question from your opening remarks, it wasn't intended on my part to be a new announcement of a new programme to reduce civil service headcount. We've been having discussions over pretty much my entire time as Permanent Secretary about what the right level of staffing is, with 2019 levels as being a broad indication of where we might end up. We currently have no plans, to your earlier point, for any redundancy schemes. To the how we ensure we don't need skills that we need, for me that gets to the civil service offer overall. That's partly about pay. I was pleased that we were able to implement a decent pay rise for civil servants in the department last year, though it won't surprise the committee that satisfaction with pay from our annual people survey is low. But it's also about the nature of the job, about the nature of support that staff get, the learning and development opportunities. And I think we are fortunate in Defence to have a civil service workforce really in a variety of roles, from direct support to the front line through to the back office, that definitely get the mission in terms of the contribution they make to the country, to the department, and in their support to the armed forces.
In terms of recruitment and retention, as you rightly noted, and I think we're all aware within the wider defence community about the crisis within recruitment and retention, there have been some stats which have just recently been published regarding Capita and their performance, and once again they've substantially missed recruitment targets. I think in terms of regular soldiers, it's the worst performance in 5 years. They've only met 63% of their targets, and that's actually less than 2/3 of their actual targets. What would you say about that, and how can this be rectified?
So the Capita contract relates to Army recruitment. We are currently well advanced in the replacement project for that contract, the Armed Forces Recruitment Project, which will operate on a tri-service basis. We are running through the final stages of commercial engagement, and expect to be in a position to place a contract by the spring of next year, and learning some of the lessons from the introduction of the original Capita recruitment contract. That new programme will have quite a phased introduction of service, so giving our new supplier, whoever that might be at the end of our competitive process, 2 years before the recruitment requirements fully step up. We've learned a number of lessons from our experience of working with Capita on recruitment, including the importance of contact with personnel in uniform at the right point in the process. This government has also set out a number of measures, including reviews of medical standards that will help reduce the number of rejections from applicants, and has set out an ambition to substantially shorten the period from application to offer to entry into training. So it's a broader programme than simply the replacement for the contract.
General, just to comment, as the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff for military capability, given the dire performance as laid out in the stats from Capita, are you concerned about the state of the Army, about recruitment? What are your views on this?
Yes, I'm concerned. As we all know, a critical part of military capability is our people, both civil service and military, and the fact that the Army have not been able to meet their targets. Through the Investment Appraisals Committee, actually, we hold them to account every quarter for the very reasons that you're articulating, Chair, because we're concerned about it. But as the Permanent Secretary has articulated, we have got a way through here. We've got a way through a broader recruiting programme and through the measures that the Permanent Secretary has just outlined. But in direct answer to your question, from a military capability perspective, yes, we need to recruit more across all three services, and we need to retain more as well.
Good.
Fully admit that.
Right. Thank you very much. Before I continue with my line of questioning, I believe three of our members wanted to come in. Lincoln and then Derek. So Lincoln, Jock, please.
Dr. Williams, can I just get the sequencing a bit clear? Because I think you described that you were into the tendering process for the replacement of CAPTA across all three services, and the government have subsequently announced these, some would say, eye-watering new targets in terms of, how quickly, a number of days before you get a place in training. Are you having to review the tender process in order to plumb in these new targets, or is it sufficiently flexible that you can apply those targets retrospectively?
No, we don't need to go around the commercial arrangements again. So, for example, one of the big factors in shortening that timeline from interest to offer to starting training is getting electronic sharing of patient records with a candidate's GPs, rather than writing to the GP and waiting for a response back. And as you might imagine, wearing a priority for a GP writing a letter to us about somebody who's essentially healthy, as opposed to the patients they're seeing on a daily basis, that's one of the factors behind the time it currently takes. We're looking at, and have made good progress with the Department of Health on getting electronic patient sharing. So some of the measures that we have to speed up that pipeline are independent of where we end up with the contract, but the incentives for performance then will be tied to those new timelines.
Thank you.
Thank you. Derek Twigg.
Just a quick one. So what will the target be for recruitments under the new system?
So I
in
think...
terms of weeks?
So in terms of weeks, that was set out in the Secretary of State's speach to party conference.
Just to remind the committee that.
But I can send you the dates.
So you don't know what the.
I don't want to give you the wrong dates. I just I don't have the precise ones in my mind.
So of the improvements that you outlined a few minutes ago, what is it that Capita are not doing now of those improvements that will change when the new contract comes in? Tell me, what's the difference? What will be the major difference? What are they not doing now and failing miserably at recruitment? What's missing currently apart from chasing up the recruitment timescale?
So the expressions of interest are actually running at quite high levels. I think it is a combination of partly how we go through and sequence the medical checks, how we take up background reference checks. So some of the speeding up is making sort of conditional offers rather than waiting until every box has been ticked.
Sorry, but what I'm having trouble sort of getting my head around is that 5 years ago it was a lot better than it is now in terms of recruitment. So what is it that?
Well,
I don't quite understand what's.
Well, I think 5 years ago it was probably worse. It then got better, and then it really plummeted during COVID, and we've not seen the recovery since then.
Sorry, Promise. I've got the numbers in front of myself. 5 years ago it was actually quite good. It was at 95% is the figure that I've got in front of me, and then it went to 88, and then 98, and then it just slumped. 23 to 68 and now 63. So I think the point that Derek Twigg's making is the fact that it's just nosediving. So what's going to be done to?
Yeah, sorry. Where we had got to 5 years ago reflected a focused improvement on the operation of the contract from when it had initially been let. So there was a reset in around, I think, 2018, 2019. It's before my time in the department. I can confirm that for you. I think it is a combination of just really grinding through the process of checks on health, on background, on qualifications, on security, and that is a process that is taking longer than we would like. Some of that will speed up through the new commercial arrangements and how we are incentivising performance. Some of it about factors that are not directly related to the contract. But look, I'd be happy to set out a fuller note.
Yeah, very grateful for that written note. Emily Albuck.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question from me. You'll have seen Lord Robertson, who's leading the SDR, has said that we need to cut troops by 20,000 if we don't increase defence spending or scrap the aircraft carriers. Is that something you concur with?
I've seen the reporting. I think when Lord Robertson was in front of this committee a couple of weeks ago, he made the point that he wasn't yet at the position where he was making recommendations, and so I'd rather wait and see what recommendations the externally led review makes to us rather than picking up on press reporting.
So it's not something you would say is accurate or likely?
It's a piece of press reporting. I would be surprised, given the importance that the current government has attached to recruitment and retention of armed forces personnel, if we were likely to get recommendations to reduce the number of armed forces personnel.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to move on, Permanent Secretary, to the Haythorne review. What is the cost to implement that? Where are we with it? And is the cost the main barrier to actually implementing it?
So the Haythorne review published just over 15 months ago by the previous government. We have been sort of taking a phased approach to its implementation. At this point, I don't have an overall cost for implementation of all of its 67 recommendations. And in practice, how I think we will take it forward is alongside priorities for people from our new ministerial team, recommendations in the people space from the SDR, is that we need to recast an overall sort of defence people plan. I'm pretty comfortable and confident that that will be broadly consistent with the direction of travel that the Haythorne review has set out, and we may at some point be able to bridge to performance against individual recommendations. So it's an important part of the departmental thinking. Rick Haythorne has met the new ministerial team to share his thoughts. But the kind of themes for us are around, and I touched on some of this at the previous hearing, are around sort of flexibility of service, so how we think about personnel coming into uniform, stepping out into other careers, coming back, how we think about veterans sometimes coming back into service, what's known as a sort of zigzag career, thinking about the sort of total reward offer, what are the elements of the package that most help us recruit and retain personnel in the armed forces, and that will be different for different people at different stages of their career, depending on their their family circumstances, their priorities. So thinking about how we can get some more flexibility into that. I think a greater recognition of skills, how we make sure that we are recognising the training and skills development of personnel in the armed forces as they move forward. So, sorry, that's a long-winded answer, Chair, I'm sorry, but it's about bringing the themes, the direction of travel of the Haythorne review into the plan for defence people that this government wants to set out, not least informed by the Strategic Defence Review.
Good. So in essence, you'll be using it to a substantial basis, the Haythorne review, to address the critical skills gaps and the personnel shortages. Right, let me then move on to Calvin Bailey, please.
Hello. So there are three major methods by which parliamentary scrutiny is conducted over defence. So the main one, well, in the past, the main one had been the Major Projects Report, which was stopped in the mid-2010s, just prior to the unfunded and ill-considered 2015 SDR. And then the equipment plan, which you stopped publishing 2 years ago, which covers about 300 billion's worth of public funding. Last year, the NAO published the report, and I note from the report that there was a gap in the affordability of about 16.9 billions, which is about 6% of the funding, and neither you nor the NAO are going to publish this report again this year. And then finally, the last vehicle was the Infrastructure and Projects Authority report, which was late, or is late, by 6 months presently. So I put to you that we have a problem with accountability, PUS. What are you going to do to address this?
So look, you will have heard from the Defence Secretary when he was here before the committee that the ministerial team has absolutely taken on board and has as a priority improving our engagement with Parliament, including our engagement with this committee. We have already run 3 briefings in the MoD for parliamentarians on Ukraine. We've expanded the number of spaces on the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme. So there's a backdrop of wanting to do more, to do better. On the specific reports, I mean, yes, the Major Projects Report was stopped some time back, although most of the relevant information was then covered in either the departmental annual report and accounts, or publication of the equipment plan, or in the IPA review of the government major programme portfolio. Just on those two specifically, I mean, the IPA report is the Cabinet Office. I mean, the IPA is part of the Cabinet Office, not part of the Ministry of Defence. It normally reports on programme status as at the end of March each year. Our input and returns to that document for the position as at March 24 are with the Cabinet Office. It got caught up in the general election, and then the sort of return of Parliament. We're engaging with the Cabinet Office on timelines for publication. My understanding is that they do expect to publish it in due course.
Do you think that approach is perhaps why we learn of major changes in the programme with no lead-in, such as today's announcement about the recovery of the housing enterprise?
Let me come back. Well, okay. I'll take that one first. Look, the announcement this morning, and there will be a full written ministerial statement in the House, which I guess will go live pretty much as soon as this hearing finishes, unless it's gone live already. Good. The timing of that announcement and the degree of confidentiality around the work to secure that deal is really down to the market-sensitive nature. We exchanged contracts last night, and it was reported to the markets as the markets opened at 7 a.m. This morning. So I think under any kind of system of parliamentary scrutiny, that kind of market sensitivity would be something that we would need to factor in. But now, obviously, the deal is done, or at least contracts are exchanged to be finalised in January. There'll be an opportunity for ministers and officials to talk through what the deal means.
Okay.
If I could just go back to our equipment plan, Minister of Defence Procurement and Industry has written to this committee and the PAC with a clear commitment that we will get back to publishing the equipment plan. It's just that while we are in a world of the externally led Strategic Defence Review. We're just in the process of the second half of the spending review. Prime Minister, Chancellor, Defence Secretary clear that a pathway to 2.5% of GDP for the defence budget will be set in the spring. The uncertainty around the precise profile of the budget and what in capability terms we want to deliver to meet the increased threats and increased instability in the world that we're asking our armed forces to meet. It's just a work in progress. And I think a kind of snapshot now would not be particularly useful. As I said last time, really keen to get input from the committee on what would be helpful in a future publication, because previous snapshots, about 6 to 9 months out of date by the time they've been through the departmental and NAO kind of scrutiny and publication, may not be the most useful thing for you anyway.
So
just to come on that, could we get a written note, please, on this for the committees that we can then investigate into the value for money aspects of this? Would that be possible, please, yeah?
On
the accommodation service?
On the accommodation deal, yes. So I would expect to publish an accounting officer assessment, but we can send you a separate note. Yeah. Look, I mean, in essence, in value for money terms, is that and I think we've got it at a good price, but more to the point, it opens up the pathway for us to invest in a state, whereas under the previous arrangements, improvements that we made to any of these 36,000 properties included the property value to our private partner, and it over time therefore increased the rent that we would pay. It frees up the ability to think through where we want to improve the quality of the existing estate, where we want to knock down and rebuild, where we want to knock down and sell surplus land for other housing. It also means that we will be saving around £230 million a year in rent. So that's the basis of the value for money argument, but I'm happy to set out a note.
Thank you. But I'll just go back to the remark you made about the timeliness of the data and how useful that is for us. We've already heard from one of the questioners that perhaps the SDR team is using data to make its decisions, and so it's quite fundamental that there is some vehicle, and I posit that 16.9 billion is something, a gap of 16.9 billion is something that we should be discussing openly, and our party has quite enjoyed discussing a similar size gap routinely in the House, and therefore it's something you should be discussing with us. But the second part of accountability and scrutiny is readiness. Milcap, and I note that last time in the Ready for War paper from the previous session that we accepted that you stopped reporting quote serious and critical weaknesses in force elements. Now we had an exceptional visit to DNS last week, and I want to thank and put on record our view on the exceptional output that DNS provides. And I would offer publicly that I think DNS should be a force element at readiness, bearing in mind that it underpins the force element at readiness elements that make a force element at readiness sustainable. So use of forces is part of understanding just how sustainable those forces are. And I note, and we may explore later, that, say, for example, typhoons aren't aligned to their NATO capabilities, and that actually may compound what we observe as a headline figure. So, for example, if there's 120 typhoons which are multi-role, some open source may be committed to ADX, some may be committed to FDX, which are the two NATO codes. One of those is air defence, one of those is strike. So we can't get any assessment, or haven't had any assessment, of those kinds of thoughts. We also haven't seen, more critically, any concerns about multi-attribution of forces, noting that we have read within Readiness of War that there's insufficient numbers, so you must be multi-attributing. And we also note that last time about 20% of your deployed forces were considered sustainable, And noting those rotation patterns, that is something entirely questionable. So with the Mill Strategic Headquarters being established, how are you going to present those risks that I've highlighted, and maybe there'll be things that we explore later?
Well, first of all, just to go back to your previous point, just to reassure you that the review, as I've mentioned in the committee last time, the review team, the SDR review team, are getting support from my team and DG Finance's team, and in fact, Chief Executive DNS's team every day. So the fact that there may not be an equipment plan in front of them doesn't mean they're not getting the most up-to-date data that we've got available to support their decision-making and their analysis. So just to reassure you on that first point. The subject of readiness is obviously something that you're very close to from your previous work in our team. You will know that we are going through a process now at the moment with NATO, through their NATO planning process. We were in Brussels the week before last on that, agreeing our targets in terms of not only our targets from a capability perspective, from a readiness perspective. You know they're at NATO secret. And we can make those available to you as we're working through that process at the moment. We're currently at stage 3. We go to stage 4 and 5 later in 2025. In terms of our own readiness for broader tasks, and again, you know, there is a process that I run with the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff for Military Strategic and Operations. Strategy and operations, and again, you know that's at UK secret. But again, it's something that we can share with you. But you wouldn't expect us to declare the readiness of our force elements in open forum. That'd be an odd thing to do. Your point about multi-attribution, absolutely, and we've said before that through the SDR there are 4 major roles that we are balancing off and providing advice to Lord Robertson and his team, whether that be in support of NATO that you've mentioned, whether it be global contingent forces, whether it be forces for homeland defence, of which there may well be in many cases an overlap with NATO, and as I mentioned before, forces to compete in the so-called grey zone or hybrid warfare. The reason I mention that is because it plays directly to your question. We will multi-attribute our forces, and we declare that to NATO, and we say where those forces are attributed. But it doesn't mean that come the moment when they're needed under Article 3, 4 or 5, they can't be reassigned to those NATO tasks. That's the whole point of, as you know, being ready for a range of tasks. I hope that answers the question across the range of questions you asked.
It's more the scrutiny. It's not the specifics of the number. It's that context that you've brought out just now isn't in the readiness report.
Yeah.
So it doesn't highlight the other challenges that you have as a military officer in being able to address and manage risk, and whether that is communicated not only within the department but more broadly to us, because we can't advocate for you if we aren't aware of the things that conflict and compete with your ability to generate those. And it's not the numbers, it's the it's the logic behind things.
No, I get that. I think I answered that by saying that we Atlas, and you know from where you've worked before, that we have a framework to express the readiness of our force elements. But they are a classification that we wish to share with you. It can't be shared today.
How do you think we can communicate that? I mean, we had an excellent session.
I'll take advice on that, Chair, on how we do that. But we're not clearly, we've got that data in terms of force elements, but we can't share it today in this committee, but we can share it.
We'll definitely take you up, General, on your kind offer for those secret and classified briefings, because I think that would be very, very useful for committee members.
We have a whole team on it, as you know.
Yeah, and I just wonder whether DNS would offer, because we did get an exceptional briefing, and which gave us really good understanding of what the support aspects behind the force elements of readiness looks like.
Yeah, I think firstly, as we discussed last week in your visit, we are keen to be as transparent and open with you as we can be. I think there's also an opportunity for us to have, if we have conversations, we've had conversations with this committee previously at higher classifications, we can then discuss how we can find a way of you representing that to the public, and we can always give you a written answer, even if there isn't a standard report. that can help us share the tone of those things to allow you to get the headline messages out.
Sure.
What we're seeking to avoiding to do for obvious reasons is give immediate indications of absolute readiness of particular forces, because that wouldn't help. Is there an opportunity at some point to talk about the recent war game and what we're doing with industry on readiness? And if not, would it be appropriate to say that now?
Definitely. I want you to bring in Emma Buck first, and then no doubt we will be coming back onto that as well. Yeah. Emma Buck.
Thank you very much, Chair. Permanent Sec, you've just mentioned in relation to the IPA report that the information is with the Cabinet Office. So I was just wondering if you could update us on how many of the MoD's major government projects portfolio are in the red, amber and green.
I don't particularly want to preempt that publication, although depending on when we get a clear idea of timelines, we may be able to give the committee a private update. But in headline terms, I think the number of reds has increased by a couple, so from sort of five to seven, otherwise broadly static.
But we've got all the answers. We can go through all the numbers. The latest report, from March 23. We've got it all here. We can go through that if you wish to. But as the Permanent Secretary said, against the reds, we've decreased slightly on the reds. But we can go into those if you wish.
Yeah, Lieutenant, we've got the numbers from last time. It was for a comparison of what the numbers are this time, because obviously we haven't seen the unpublished report yet. But I know Permanent Sec said the information is with the Cabinet Office, so I'm just curious. You're saying there's 7 now are in the red.
So in terms of declared, again, for classification, as you know, there were 5 declared reds against March 23, and we're predicting, we'll see the report, but we're predicting against those declared, that will probably go to 7.
And what about the amber and the green?
So there's a slight decrease in the amber because the overall number of projects has gone down by 1. Greens are about the same.
Sorry, did you say the amber's increased or decreased?
Amber's decreased by a balancing figure. So 2 up on red, down on the ambers by a couple.
Okay.
It is, if I may, worth describing to the committee some of the dynamics that are going on behind programmes, because I think that would be of interest to you, but also of general interest. Globally, we are going through some extraordinary dynamics across the automotive, aerospace and defence sectors. In those dynamics are affecting both skills and supply chain very significantly, and that's knocking on to the delivery of all big programmes across all sectors globally. When I discuss the dynamics of programme management within the Conference of National Armaments Directors with my NAD counterparts, they are all seeing the same underlying dynamics, and those dynamics are these. In COVID, there was a dramatic reduction in the aerospace industry in capacity, and that's because it was a matter of business survival. And the same was true in automotive. So as a consequence, a lot of factories were shut, and a lot of talent, particularly talent that was close to retirement, moved out of the sector. During COVID, in some ways, the defence sector benefited a bit through gaining access to that capacity. As we came out of COVID, the automotive industry had a big backlog of activity to fill, and so did the aerospace industry. And the aerospace industry in particular, because people are now going back on holiday at a scale that's pre-COVID levels, they're creating incredible demand on the whole industrial supply chain. What that's done is it's pushed out the lead times on components from 2 weeks to some cases to 2 years. And in terms of skills, it's created an incredible skills shortage across the whole sector that we've talked about. The knock-on consequence to that in defence has been that our industrial suppliers have found it harder to get components and harder to get skills, so they're having to work really hard to hold the delivery schedules on programmes and deliver programmes to cost. So I'm actually really pleased that our headline data is as good as we've just described it, because relative to what's going on globally, that's actually quite a good performance. The challenge we've now got to address through the whole sector is how do we start to ramp up skills? There's a very strong skills shortage. You've challenged me on that before, and quite rightly so. We're trying to get together with the former DSF and Defence Growth Partnership, now the Defence Industries Joint Council. So we're trying to get together with that community to work out how do we work better with academia to stimulate more people coming into the defence sector. How do we continue to ramp up apprenticeships and graduate roles coming in at the bottom end of the system? And I'm really pleased to see actually how active our sector has been in both apprenticeship and skills. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to visit any of the many apprenticeship academies across the country. I was up in the one up in Scotland, the shipyards, in fact two on the shipyards only a few months ago. So there's a real effort to try to get more people into the sector at the bottom. But nevertheless, for the next couple of 3 years, we're going to find that all three sectors, aerospace, automotive and defence, will have skills shortage and component shortages because of that reduction in capacity that happened.
So Andy, sorry to interrupt you, but are you saying you envisage that number 7 in the red, it'll keep going up then?
So we have to work really hard to keep it down. Let's put it that way.
Can I just move on to...
For the record, by the way, it's 2 have gone down. Amber, 2, it's 41 to 39 of the declared programmes. It's 41 to 39 from March 23 to March 24, as Mr. Starr said, and then 5 to 7 on the red in terms of the declared programmes.
So it's a collective effort for both government and industry to work together to make sure that we continue to deliver those really difficult, complicated programmes. The point I'm making to you is it's got harder.
And just in relation to the grey category, which is unpublished for national security reasons, but we know last time there was 4 projects in that category. How many are in that category this time?
Well, I've got the numbers here, but I'm nervous about declaring that number.
Okay.
We can certainly provide that to you in closed session.
Has it gone up or down, Lieutenant? Can you give us? Has it gone up or down?
In terms of those programmes that are greyed out.
Green. Green or grey?
Grey.
Those that are greyed out, has the red gone up or down? Is that the question?
Yeah.
It's gone up.
It's gone up. Okay. Just, we're a bit curious, as you can imagine, that looking at the Clyde infrastructure project, that went from green, amber to red, and then grey last year. Are we right to be concerned that perhaps national security is being used as a cover-up for project failure?
We can talk about. Should we talk about the Clyde infrastructure programme? There are a number of issues with the Clyde infrastructure programme, and that's why it's at red. One of them is, as Mr. Starks just described, the right skills that we need. Not easy to attract those types of skills in that part of the country all of the time. That's always a challenge. There has been an issue over specifying the requirement as we've developed our nuclear enterprise. That has been tricky. There have been it's the whole of the Clyde infrastructure programme. The third reason I would say, the whole of the Clyde infrastructure programme is literally being grown from an infrastructure base that is fragile. And therefore we are encountering infrastructure problems on the Clyde, both in Faslane and Coulport, which are probably worse than the project envisaged when the CIP was set up.
I suppose, Lieutenant, my question was a bit wider. It's we're concerned that projects are moving into grey to cover up for their failure, so that we can't get the detail.
I resist that.
How could we have confidence that that's not the case, though?
We can have other sessions to go into the detail of any of the programmes. But we can't go into the detail in open forum in certain programmes. But I can reassure you, there is no drive on the department from the department side to turn programmes grey so they can't be scrutinised. They can be scrutinised, but just in the appropriate way.
So could perhaps through the chair, obviously, could we perhaps have a private session around some of those grey projects
the permanent
with yourselves?
Secretary and the chair to decide.
Chair?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
I think that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Alex Baker.
Thank you, Chair. So I note obviously your comments around the equipment plan, and it's great to hear that we are going to have an equipment plan moving forward. But we obviously do know that you're managing a budget of £300 billion of taxpayers' money going towards defence procurement and support. Could you give the committee the sort of top line info for the next 10 years? So what is the allocated budget and what are the forecast costs?
Do you want to? Yes. Do you want to have a go at that? I mean, sorry, my hesitation is just that the 10-year programme is kind of the end state for us of the work flowing out of the SDR in terms of the capability choices that the government wants to make alongside the funding allocation over that period. The current spending review will run until sort of the end of the decade. We'll then be making assumptions about what the budget might be in the 2030s and what share of that will be allocated to the equipment programme. My point about it being a work in progress is that actually it's genuinely quite hard for us to give you much of the headlines at the moment. But in terms of big handfuls of where in our current programme spend goes, that might be a helpful illustration. But whether that's for DG Finance or the GCS military capability, I maybe leave to the panel.
Well, I mean, I would add, as we've discussed in the panel, we do have a challenging financial position. As the Permanent Secretary sets out, the long-term management of that will be set through the Strategic Defence Review findings and the second phase of the spending review. I did want to highlight the fact that the autumn budget earlier this year allocated an additional 2.9 billion of defence next year, and that includes 1.9 billion of capital expenditures. That's the second largest capital increase across Whitehall, and that has been very welcome in terms of underpinning our financial plans for next year, and represents 2.7% real terms increase, which helps address some of the inflationary pressures that we do see in the short term. But as the Permanent Secretary sets out, the longer term pathway for us will be through the Strategic Defence Review, the spending review, and agreeing the trajectory to the 2.5% that will underpin our long-term financial planning.
I mean, for us, we had Lord Robertson in front of us obviously 2 weeks ago, and he told us we are pretty rigorous in costing all of what we are doing. So it is clear to us that these figures exist, and I think for us it's just about what is the pathway to us being able to have visibility and to really understand the numbers that you were working with, basically.
Yes, I absolutely understand that. I mean, I think to build on the General's earlier point, what we haven't done is share a kind of secret version of a 10-year equipment programme with the SDR reviewers. What we are doing is responding to questions from them of, if we recommended X, what would that cost? Or if we recommended Y, what would that mean in terms of equipment or people or wider resourcing? So that we are answering a range of specific questions from them, as well, of course, providing them with some sort of broader financial context. But the marrying together in the first instance of their recommendations is a matter for the external review team and the recommendations they make to ministers. And then my expectation is there'll be a lot then of departmental work to translate their recommendations into detailed capability choices for ministers. Now, that's not to say that there isn't good, as the General says, daily engagement. And actually, I've been really heartened by the richness of the department's engagement with the externally led review during its review and challenge phase. But we are still at the point where the reviewers are synthesising their recommendations. They'll be testing those with ministers in the first part of 2025, and so both the content of the programme, how the direction from the SDR might be delivered, how much that costs, and how that sits against budgets is really all work in progress.
Right. Thank you, Raj. We want to move now on to defence capability, and I'd like to ask Derek Twigg to lead on this particular aspect.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can I just ask what we're currently spending as GDP on defence?
Sorry,
we're currently spending.
Currently spending, it's 2.3 or possibly 2.29.
Yeah. So exactly what?
2.29% GDP.
2.29. And if you strip out the money we've put in for Ukraine, what's left to directly fund the UK military?
So very broadly, 3 billion of expenditure equates to 0.1% of GDP. So we are assuming 3 billion of expenditure on support of Ukraine this year. So 2.29 would reduce to 2.19.
So 2.29
would reduce to 2.19 if you excluded that 3 billion of support.
2.19. Okay. And Lord Robertson told us regarding the SDR that we can only say to the government what 2.5% of GDP can produce. This to us implies that 2.5% of expenditure will be focused directly on delivering capability for our armed forces. So if the conflict in Ukraine is ongoing, will that funding be in addition to the 2.5%?
Shall I, do you want to?
No.
In the way in which NATO spend is counted, the spend that we make on operations, both in support of Ukraine and indeed elsewhere, counts towards our declarations to NATO. This government has confirmed that we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. So while we're spending that sort of money on Ukraine, it will count against the 2.5% target. If and when we get to the point where we aren't spending 3 billion a year on Ukraine, then there would be more money available for direct spend on the UK armed forces. But I think it's worth saying, of course, that the spend that we are making, the support that we are giving to our Ukrainian partners to keep them in the fight, directly supports UK national interests in terms of the engagement they're having with Russia and the impact that's having on the capability of the Russian military. So it's not as unreasonable, I think, to include it in our spend targets.
No, it's in our national interest to support Ukraine. So going forward, so the previous government said it was going to reach 2.5%. I assume that would have, while the Ukraine war was ongoing, that would have been included in the 2.5%. So it wouldn't have been 2.5% spent directly on the British military.
No, it would have. The basis for Ukraine would be the same.
And that's what your understanding is from the current government, that it will still be 2.5% will include the Ukraine, and not 2.5% spent directly on the British military.
Yep, including the cost of operations wherever counts towards the NATO spend target.
Okay.
Building on that theme, so we obviously had the review team in, and I thought slightly disappointingly, from my point of view, they acknowledged that their writing instructions are 2.5%. That's it. So the idea that it was sort of Treasury-led rather than threat-based was something that we had a discussion about. But to a certain extent, I thought, well, that must be good for the programmers, because 2.5% you can program that, right? But then they said two other interesting things, which was that they were not required to seek consensus, and the other one was that they felt no obligation to fill in legacy holes in the programme, some of which have been around for 40 years. And so that suggested to me that what they might be coming up with is something quite radical, and which will require a sort of seismic shift in the way in which the building approaches the review. And I think it was General Barron's, who said he considered the greatest risk inherent in the SDSR was the building getting at it and sort of giving it a stiff ignoring, and I think his phrase was going back to normal jogging. So in terms of sort of cultural approach, are you ready for what might come? I mean, it's tricky. You can always say, well, let's see what comes. But in terms of preparing the department for this review, which might be quite radical, where do you think you're at?
Well, I won't say, well, let's see what comes. Mr. Job, tempting though it is. Look, let me build on my previous point. If I had a concern in the sort of reverse direction when the review was set up, was that in the first phase of information gathering, the department was invited to submit, alongside lots of other partners and industry and think tanks, our thoughts on the 24, subsequently split out 30-odd propositions that the review was looking for input on, and we sort of did that by the end of August. There has been a really rich engagement between the department and the review and challenge panels, and some of the feedback to me from externals is about the quality and imagination of departmental thinking, which this externally led review has prompted. So I'm feeling more optimistic about the fact that actually, although externally led, the department, and I don't mean particularly the Chief of Defence Staff and me on a daily basis, but the department in policy teams, in capability teams, frontline commands, Mr. Start's organisation, have been engaged in kicking around a whole bunch of ideas that the review and challenge panels will put to the external review team. They're then in that synthesis phase, and we're helping them with that as well. So it's possible there will be some radical recommendations. I'm not necessarily expecting at the end for them to be a surprise, because key parts of the department have been on this journey with them. I just don't know exactly what they're going to recommend at this stage. But then getting into implementation is going to be absolutely critical. And the implementation of the SDR, alongside our input into the spending review, actually work on the defence industrial strategy, work on the defence reform changes to the department, so that we will be implementing measures through the new construct of the Department of State, the Military Security Headquarters, through the new National Armaments Director and the Defence Nuclear Enterprise. We've absolutely got to get that right. We can't just drift into it. But I'm really I've been heartened and feeling quite positive about the level of engagement the department's got. So I think we will hit the ground running. But
can I just do a couple of bills? Just to reinforce, engagement's been fantastic. In my space, which is kind of the industry and acquisition space, we have phenomenal number of inputs from individual companies, from the trade associations, from the unions, from the DSF and others, in terms of what they were looking to for change. And actually, there's been a huge amount of agreement that there's a massive opportunity for us to seize. So I think you'll find the department not resisting that in the space of acquisition reform. I think you'll see the department embracing it. I'd also say the culture within defence. I've been in defence 2.5 years from having a long industrial background, and I've seen that culture change quite dramatically. The scale of engagement that we had in changing my organisation of DNS, over 1,500 people from across academia, all the think tanks, industry, and people from across defence engaged in redesigning our organisation. And we're a phenomenally different organisation today than the one that we were. That there's been no lack of desire to change to deliver a better output. If you cut anybody in defence through the middle, you will find just a passion to keep the nation safe and help it prosper. And that culture, I think, is certainly alive and kicking in my organisation. And I've seen through the defence reform change a real appetite, both from the department but also from the political leadership, to make defence better. And I'm quite excited about it.
Can I just add 3 examples to that? I mean, you're getting at a cultural issue here. that those in the military probably you're referring to are traditionalist and wish to protect what they've got and they review as a threat. Well, first of all, I think everyone that's in this business would accept that the programme of record is largely, not exclusively, is largely what it was pre-February 22. It would be amazing if the programme of record pre-February 2022 is the programme of record we need for the future. Now we're absolutely on this shift to warfighting deterrence and to warfight if necessary. Let me give 3 examples of this innovative nature that both the Permanent Secretary and Mr. Stark have been speaking about. So within the Army, Project Asgard, which you may have heard of, this is CGS's drive to be innovative in Estonia or wherever, learning lessons from Ukraine, particularly through AI-enabled capability, putting more money into that. He wasn't doing that 2 or 3 years ago. He's absolutely doing it now, and we'll see how that plays out through the independent review. In Air Command, in the air environment, the so-called ACPs, these autonomous collaborative platforms, or loyal wingmen, if you like to use the vernacular, that we are now really working closely with our key allies, particularly the US and Australia, potentially other partners like Japan. But that is something that's the future in terms of a network-enabled, autonomous air, both intelligence and strike capability. And I think if the first Sea Lord were here, he would be absolutely promoting his whole autonomous portfolio, from seabed through to underwater, through to surface, through to air-enabled capability. So I think innovation is alive and well, because the battle space we're seeing in front of our very eyes globally is changing so much. And I think that culture is alive and well. And I think the review will reflect that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just pick up on those comments you just made, General, about warfighting mindset and a shift to that approach, because the Secretary-General of NATO recently made similar remarks, I think within the last week, talking about the need for NATO countries to shift to a warfighting mindset. But it would seem to me that a warfighting mindset would be incompatible with a country spending as little as 2.19% on its own defences. So let's explore this gap between this increasing rhetoric from some military figures and defence figures around warfighting mindset and then the actual amounts of money we're talking about, because you've been scrutinised this morning around some of the challenges that defence has got, which largely stem from challenges with funding. So how can we close this gap between the idea that we as a country are under threat and we need to respond to that, versus having such a limited pot of money? And if I could come to Mr. Stark first.
Look, there is no question that the world is dramatically more dangerous than it was for most of my working career. No question. You can see that in the stats in the number of concurrent conflicts. You can see that in what's been said publicly about grey zone conflict. So, as a nation, we have a choice, a political choice, about how much we as a nation are prepared to do about that. You can see countries across NATO in very different places. If you look at the countries that are closest to Russia, you'll see how much they, as a country, have decided to spend on their defence. We as a country need to make our choice. That's a political decision. It's not a decision for the department. From us as officials, our job, and Rob's job specifically, is to say within the budget that the government deems to be affordable and the general public thinks is what it thinks it wants to spend on defence. Our job is to make sure we make that spend as appropriate as we possibly can make it and as effective as we possibly can make it. So Rob is presenting choices about how we absolutely squeeze the maximum value out of it and how we pivot things that we've done during a largely relatively benign couple of decades, how we pivot from that to being in a position to warfight. And that means shifting our posture It's certainly about making sure that we spend more on munitions, and you can see that that we're actually really actively going after that. And it's about prioritisation. So we are not in a position to make. We're very clear and open about the fact that there's a rising threat. We're very clear and open that we will seek to do the best we can with whatever the government, whatever the country decides it can afford.
Sorry, I'm just going to challenge that. I don't think that the MoD is clear and open about the fact there's a rising threat. And obviously there are challenges with classification on that. General McGowan, do you think that the Cabinet, outside of the Defence Secretary, understand the threat to the UK at the moment?
I don't really think that's a question for me, but I mean, I think that my first point would be CDS has been very clear about the nature of the threat and the increasing threat in his latest Rusi speech and before that. So I don't think there's any doubt that publicly we've been doing all we can to impress upon people, whether they be in the Cabinet or in the public domain, that there is an increasing threat. And like you, I've just read the NATO Secretary General's speech. I think if you put that against our Chief of Defence Staff's recent speech, I think they would look pretty similar. So we are doing what we can to educate people generally on the nature of the threat. So I would ask the Cabinet rather than me.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Permanent Secretary, the idea that we might have more money to spend on defence than 2.5% in the future isn't kind of debated much, because currently people are asking about the 2.5% figure. Do you get the sense that the level of threat that you kind of understand to this country requires more than 2.5% to be spent to be on a genuine warfighting mindset?
Well, again, I think that's a political choice. So the government's commitment is to set a pathway, and that will be in the spring, to 2.5%, and we'll see how quickly we get to that level. It's in the nature, obviously, of a range of our defence programmes, and the nuclear deterrent is probably the principal one that we think not one Parliament ahead, but two or three, but we think in decades. So understanding where defence spending might go by the end of the 2030s, say, is a different question, I think, on where defence spending goes in this Parliament. I think we have been a bit too guilty in the department previously about simply playing against one line of numbers. I think into the 2030s, what I would like to do is illustrate for ministers the kind of capability choices you get for some different budget scenarios, but that will be for political decision and not necessarily now. But we'll see where it goes. Look, I don't. I can see the geopolitical trends, but I would be. I think foolhardy to say that I've got a complete crystal ball on what the world is going to look like in 2035 or 2040.
As anyone would be. So threat is one of how you assess threat leads to your understanding of risk, so impact and likeliness. And recently at Rusi, the Chief of the Defence Staff said that, and I quote, "We are still too slow, we are still too cautious, and we are still too risk adverse. There is still too much hierarchy and process." If I could come to Ms Blackmore, you are the Director General for Finance in the MoD. Previously you've worked in industry. You've worked at BT, RBS and KPMG. They have a different risk appetite to the MoD. Could you talk a bit about how you look at risk in the MoD?
Yes. Very different industries and very different risk profiles. I mean, you're absolutely correct to say one of the challenges for us in the department is how we understand our risk position, how we understand our risk appetite, and how we ensure that we have agile processes in place to be able to deliver the critical capabilities that we need, acknowledging the risk position that we face within the department. I think we the Secretary of State launched a defence reform programme when he arrived, which is really critical for us in being able to ensure that we are structured with the right processes and the right controls in place to be able to support that agile delivery with a laser sharp focus on what impact we're trying to achieve and what risk is appropriate to take in order to deliver those outcomes. And I think that programme of reform is going to be really important to us as a department in order to move to a place which we've talked about in the committee today, being able to deliver against that rising threat level.
Can I just address one point, sorry, just to make sure that we're talking not at cross purposes here. And you naming a number of companies effectively implying that we are a risk-averse organisation, risk-averse armed forces. Could I ask you, your Marines on the ground, do they lack the appetite to take operational and tactical risk?
Well, I think that the risk we're talking about is...
I just want to make sure that we're not putting a message out there that there's lack of risk amongst our frontline troops.
Thank you, General. So the risk to the UK is across many different domains, many different factors. You can be so risk averse that you then don't invest in the capabilities that long term, in 10, 20 years' time, it turns out you needed to invest in to then not expose yourself. Mr. Stark, can I ask you, do you think risk aversion in defence procurement slows us down too much, or are we kind of in the right space on making sure we have the right checks and balances before procuring?
I think there's a couple of dynamics. Let me just park risk for a second and talk about process. We've made, through the changes we've made over the last 2.5 years, we've recognised that the process we had, which was really designed for a much more benign world, was no longer appropriate, and we need to have a more efficient and speedy acquisition system. We need to go, in particular, for faster decisions and then spiralling up. And you can see that within the integrated procurement model. Within the suggestions we've made to the SDR, we've suggested further changes which will kind of accelerate the pace with which we make acquisition decisions and get to the point of contract. I think the expression that was Mr. Jock used earlier on was normal jogging. We want our normal jogging to be faster. We can be very fast, and some of the we've got some of the things we did for Ukraine and some of the things we've done for urgent operational requirements. We've done in a matter of days, getting things on contract. Big, complicated programs will always take time, but we need to make them much quicker than they've been. So we're working on the process, which has nothing to do with risk. It has to do with making sure that you align the preparatory work and align the checking work together to be efficient. So we've got an efficiency opportunity, then we're going after that. And as I said, we've made changes already, and we've made further recommendations as part of the SDR and defence reform. In terms of risk, I think there is a necessary shift of a perception of risk by all of us within government to recognise that the world's more dangerous. So in a world where it is broadly benign, as it has been for much of the last 30 years, you can take much longer to make decisions than you can in today's world. So there is a need for a shift of risk perception. Actually, we are tending to see that, and I think it will need to continue and be moderated with what's going on in the world.
Right, thank you. I believe Alex Baker wanted to comment on this point.
So thank you, Chair. Picking up on the words my colleague Fred Thomas has just shared with you from the Chief of the Defence Staff, and his words in particular, there is still too much hierarchy and process. I wondered if you've got any thoughts about the large numbers of obviously senior civil servant grade civilians and star-ranked military officers. Is the department too heavy, too top-heavy?
Permanent Secretary, perhaps? Start, or would you like me to?
I can have a go if you like.
Do you want to have a go from Medina's perspective, and I might come in broadly?
It's a challenging dynamic, this. we've just gone through a process within my organisation to reduce the size of the top level team in my management team, which we've reduced by about 20%. So that would imply that I did think that we could be smaller and be flatter and get more speed out of that organisation. And when I say actually the organisational design process that we went through to redesign DNS, and it's the biggest change of DNS in a decade, we did it in a collaborative way, and the conclusion was that actually we needed a flatter structure in order to be able to deliver more speed and more efficiency. So there are places where there's definitely opportunity for us to have less at the top and more, particularly in the middle. As we automate more at the bottom and we bring more digital tool sets, you need a lot more people to work on the programs. And in fact, in the restructuring of my organisation, we've delivered hundreds of thousands of more hours to delivery by stripping out process and by flattening the structures. So we've been able to do that within DNS. There are opportunities to do that in the wider department as we simplify the wider department through defence reform. So I think there are opportunities. The counterpoint, and there's a number of counterpoints, in the civil service space, we do some really, really complicated things with our international partners, and you need some pretty competent and capable people to do that. In order to get people of that capability into the civil service, we have to have a level of seniority and pay that is at least within range of the sorts of ranges that would be in the private sector. Otherwise, we won't get the talented individuals. That will tend to drive you towards higher grade counts. And as a nation, I think we want the most capable people in our civil service doing those really complicated things that are important for the nation. So I think there's a balancing act. I think we've got to absolutely keep focusing on flatter, leaner, more focused structures with maximum amounts of automation. And at the same time, we've got to focus on getting really, really talented people in. In the military space, and I'll let the General speak for a moment, but in the military space, we know we need to play a stronger role in NATO. In order to play a strong role in NATO, we need to place senior officers in the right place, and the more influence we can get within NATO, I think the better for our nation and the better for NATO. And the same is true with strengthening our relationships with our international allies, and that requires people of a sufficient senior rank. So I think we degrade the country's influence if we focus on reducing the star count at the top, if those star counts are driving global influence.
All right, thank you. Permanent Secretary, just briefly on that as well, please.
So, if you think of the Ministry of Defence as being a large operational delivery department, so with just under 60,000 civil servants, and the number of SES we've got, just under 1%. I mean, benchmarks well against the sort of DWPs, HMRCs of this world. So in percentage terms, actually, it's quite a thin top layer. Nevertheless, the number of SES posts has grown over the last 5 years, partly for the reasons that Mr. Starr sets out. There's been some particular growth in and around the nuclear enterprise, as we have put that on a more sustainable footing. There's been a particular growth as we've converted some external hires, particularly in the digital space, into permanent civil servants. And there have been a range of task and finish groups that have needed senior leadership. We probably need to be a bit better at the finish bit of task and finish, but that's accounted for much of the growth. But as we get into our strategic workforce planning, that we need to do anyway to ensure that we can deliver against this government's ambition, deliver the SDR with the kind of enthusiasm that Mr. Jopp was looking for, but also as we think about our return to the Treasury in the second half of the spending review, that sort of strategic workforce planning, I think, will need to look at spans and layers. There are definitely lots of layers in the department, and thinking about how we simplify our processes, not least to support the kind of pace of decision making that gets behind the kind of the risk appetite question. We will be having a look at senior numbers, but to go back to where I started, I don't have a target in mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Michelle Scrogan, please.
Thank you, Chair. The SDR promises improved capabilities in the future, but last year the MoD scrapped Tranche 1 of its Typhoons, and more recently the 2 amphibious assault ships plus numerous helicopters, drones and Royal Navy ships have all been decommissioned. What impact does this have on our capabilities and our future deterrent in the short term? This is mainly to the General.
Well, I think the Secretary of State, in terms of the 6 retirements that you just mentioned, the Secretary of State outlined to the House the implications of that. 3 of those involved vessels that were no longer seaworthy. So we were spending money against capabilities that were never going to be used operationally. So I think that was a pretty strong case with regard to the retirement of those 3 classes of ship, one in particular in terms of Type 23 rather than the whole class, and you touched on LPDs. The drones you're talking about, we've learned through Ukraine that the capability represented by that particular class, Watchkeeper, was no longer fit for operational purpose. And that's why we are working really closely with the Army and ensuring they're funded to deliver the sorts of drone capability in 2025 to replace the drone that's been retired in terms of Watchkeeper. And that's saved us quite a lot of money in terms of that long tail of Ardell in support of Watchkeeper. The other 2 are associated with rotary wing, Puma in Cyprus and Puma in Brunei, in support of training in, primarily training in Brunei, and in support of a range of tasks, including support to firefighting with the Cypriot government in Cyprus. We are now, before a replacement capability comes in 26 and 27, we're looking at a range of capabilities right now, this week in fact, providing advice to the Secretary of State on how we might plug those gaps, and we're confident we will plug those gaps in different ways before the replacement for Puma in Cyprus and Brunei come into play. And the last one is CH-47 Chinook. This is retiring the oldest and most expensive 14 CH-47s, as we see in the so-called extended range Chinook towards the end of this decade. And we thought that was a prudent thing to do, that we should be looking to the future in terms of those capabilities rather than reaching back into, in practical terms, investing in exceptionally old aircraft, and we can manage the operational risk accordingly. And the last point you made at the very beginning is Typhoon Tranche 1. Typhoon Tranche 1, that decision was made some time ago. That was a straight, ruthless balance of investment decision. When that retires in 2027, Tranche 2 aircraft will replace those in the Falklands. That's where those Tranche 1s are right now. But that was reducing our combat mass is not something that we'd want to do necessarily, but we are increasing the combat mass through F-35 in the shorter term and obviously through GCAP in the longer term. But either way, that was a straight balance investment decision.
I'm sort of more interested in the short term rather than, I understand, getting rid of redundant kit. But what are your thoughts on the short term capability for deterrence right now? So not what we've got or planning in the future, but right now, what has that done to impact on that?
Well, those particular measures, we think they're manageable, but we've been here in the committee before, and I think Mr. Twigg and I had a conversation the last time that we are concerned about our overall readiness. We are concerned our ability to sustain the fight. So from a military capability perspective, that is why we're impressing upon, in fact, Mr. Sott mentioned it, that is why we are impressing upon the Secretary of State, and he's absolutely responding to, and rightly so, and in fact he's driving it, he's leading it himself, understandably so, to ensure that we've got more sustainment, in particular in terms of munitions, but also some of those enabling capabilities to enable us to fight, whether they be medical or being able to respond to chemical and biological attack, and whether we're able to ensure that our networks are up to date so we can really prosecute operations in the way we're seeing in some parts of the world, particularly Ukraine, but not exclusively Ukraine. So absolutely there are areas where there is operational risk that we're carrying, which is uncomfortable. And that is why we are preempting that through some early investment, and that I'm sure will be at the leading edge of the SDR. We'll see how that plays out.
Secretary, you wanted to respond there as well, I think.
Just very quickly on your reference to deterrence. So for me, I think deterrence works at a number of levels. It's a combination of our independent nuclear deterrent, of our allies and partners, and particularly our membership of NATO. Yes, it's about the military capability that we have. It's also about the political willingness to use that capability, as well as the outlook of members of our armed forces that the General alluded to previously. It's also about the resilience of the homeland base. In the statement of intent about the new defence industrial strategy, one of the lenses that we will be looking at is about the deterrence effect of having a defence industry with the right capability and capacity. So when we're thinking about deterrence overall, it's about the combination of all of those factors rather than just one part.
And I think just to add to that, I mean, our Chief of Defence Staff has been on record saying, we didn't have Finland and Sweden in the alliance before Russia invaded Ukraine. He's also been on record, as Mr. Williams and I are articulating, that deterrence is working strategically because that Putin is contained in Ukraine, not in the way we want it to be contained, but he is contained in Ukraine, and therefore the deterrence of the alliance and our contribution to the alliance, particularly through CASD, continuous at sea deterrent, is working.
Thank you.
But we do have concerns.
Thank you for that. Earlier this year, the Chief of General Staff has said that he wants to double the capabilities within 3 years and triple it by the end of the decade. That's specifically the Army's fighting power. Having given at least 60 of the AS-90 howitzers to Ukraine, we've only had 14 back from Sweden. How achievable do you think that goal is?
Well, that's his aspiration. That's our aspiration. That's the Defence Secretary's aspiration for all the reasons we've said. If we're going to deter as an alliance, whether we're going to deter as a nation, as part of that alliance, we've got to demonstrate that we have the lethality and the resilience to stay in the fight. And so what CGS is talking about, as you just mentioned, double 27, triple 30 is an absolute part of his advice that he's putting to the review and that we are supporting. The case you make in terms of AS-90 and the retirement and the gifting of AS-90 to Ukraine, as you mentioned, the capability, the interim capability that you just alluded to, the Swedish capability is Archer, which is going to be operational almost now in early 25, but the long-term commitment not fully confirmed, but we are in close negotiations. We're Mr. Start's team in close negotiations with the German government and with Rheinmetall on this so-called RCH 155. And to respond to the delta that we felt, that we decided to take operational risk in the British Armed Forces rather than take risk at the front line with Ukraine. But part of that, and we've mentioned this in the committee before, and the reason why RCH 155 is so important is because part of that deterrence is industrial resilience, and that partnership through RCH 155, if it comes to fruition fully, will see significant investment by Rheinmetall. They're already invested. Further investment in the UK to support that programme.
How achievable do you think it is in 3 years?
So if I can come in on a few bits here. Firstly, we deter as NATO. And as we've just talked about, NATO's got much stronger. But there is a real opportunity within NATO. NATO maximises its deterrent when it standardises its equipment and it's interoperable and it's interchangeable. And therefore, some of the things we're pushing for, like the RCH 155, where it's a standardised capability on the back of a standardised Boxer vehicle with interchangeable modules on the back, that creates because there will be well over 1,000 Boxer vehicles across NATO. That makes NATO much more effective when we collaborate with our allies and we standardise the solutions. And I'm really pleased to say that around Boxer, we've not only done that, but we've also done it in such a way that we're strengthening UK defence industry and UK supply chains, because we're building both in the UK and in Germany. And that collaboration with Germany through through the recent agreement is only strengthening, which makes NATO stronger, and it makes our industrial resilience stronger, and makes us able to sustain the fight for longer when we have those kind of capabilities.
Yeah, but the problem, gents, is I don't think the member's question has quite been answered. How achievable is the 3-year goal? That's the key question.
I'm just coming to that, and I apologise for being slow. What we've learned as a consequence of Ukraine is that there are technologies that can be brought to bear that are completely different from the traditional way that we would have fought. Chief of General Staff's ambition is achievable in that by strengthening the sorts of munitions we've got, augmenting them with UAVs, better situational awareness and intelligence, and other capabilities that we've now identified are available. You can make the fighting force far more lethal by augmenting the capabilities of some of that new tech, on top of making sure that we've got some of our more traditional assets modernised and renewed. So it's not easy to achieve the timeframes it's got, but we can certainly make a massive difference in quite a short period of time through digitisation, integration, making sure that that the sensors we have can trigger effectors, i.e. missiles, bombs, bullets, and guns and things from other places. If we can cross-connect those, you can create much more lethality without having to have huge amounts more kit.
Can I just get a quick yes or no? Is it achievable in 3 years then?
So I'll let me answer it this way: that to achieve that doubling by 27 and tripling it by 2030 is a choice. That means prioritising lethality to meet the targets that CGS has laid out. And from a military capability perspective, lethality is at the top of the prioritised list. That's all we can say right now.
So technically and programmatically, yes, but it's part of the wider SDR choices that they have to make in terms of where they choose to put the money.
Thank you, Raj. Just to say, I've got 3 members who wanted to come in on this particular point. I'm mindful that we've got less than half an hour, and there's still quite a bit of ground to cover on various other aspects of your respective work. So just very, very briefly, and then brief responses, please. Calvin Bailey, please.
Sorry, I'd just firstly like to welcome General Gown's amplification of the cuts that we were very supportive of last time, and perhaps we didn't get after the importance of our positive impact to Ardell. So it was very welcome to hear that publicly. But the deletion of capability is not just about the immediate impacts that are managed by the General. And just to use an example, deletion of C-130J, which whilst it was replaced by a better piece of equipment, had a massive impact on the defence industrial capacity, our leadership in a niche part of the industry, and more importantly, our ability to grow and maintain skills. Have you any concerns similarly with the medium lift helicopter programme? Mr. Starr.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah.
I can go first.
Anyone, just briefly, please.
Well, first of all, I dispute what you just said, by the way, because A400 has delivered capacity through Airbus into the UK, as opposed to Boeing. Yeah. So that's not denigrating Boeing's commitment to the UK industrial resilience. In fact, we've presented a paper here from Boeing on what they're doing. But I think it is Airbus have been supported through that A400 contract and continues to be so.
No, sorry, what I was saying was that by deleting C-130J, well, I could have spoken about subs. We effectively lost an industry in Marshall's Aerospace and the skills that were grown over in Cambridge. So we lost part of our industrial capacity. It wasn't the capability. The capability, that decision is a defence decision.
That's what I've just said. But the Airbus have increased their capability and capacity as a result of the A400 contracts. Anyway, you were talking about NMH.
Yeah, it's the industrial capacity that comes from it.
From NMH?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's playing out now, and we've been public. There's one bidder left, and that bidder has significant investment in the UK. So I think from an industrial perspective, and the criteria for that competition has been very clear about it must be designed and built in the United Kingdom if we're talking about NMH.
Lincoln Jott, please.
Yeah, General, just picking up on the Pumas in Brunei and Cyprus. The Secretary of State, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, announced that was ending. and I think you said that he's being briefed this week on options to fill that capability gap. So presumably that means that you know that all those options are cheaper than Puma, because otherwise it would have been like putting HR before the planning to announce it before he'd made a decision on those options.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Derek Twigg, please.
Yeah, Tim, I thought we'd go through the exchanges we've had previously on capability in terms of resilience and force generation, but can I ask you something specifically, because I think you referred to it briefly in earlier comments, about the medical support for our frontline armed forces. Are you concerned about the level and depth of medical support and whether actually it's capable of providing that sort of support that we needed, and should we get into the conflict we talked about previously?
Absolutely. And I think we are, and there are a number of people in this room who've got operational experience in these parts of the world, but we became exceptionally adept, and we needed to, at reaching a casualty in a particular part of the battle space and getting that particular casualty or a small number of casualties back to, in this particular case, Bastion. And the whole machinery was focused around that, and rightly so. We were responding to an operational environment in this particular case in Helmand. But now that we are looking to ensure that we meet our deterrence requirements as part of the alliance, it is a national responsibility to ensure that we can protect the force and we can recover elements of that force who become injured. The numbers associated with that are far in excess, as you know, from something that might have happened in some of the operations we've been involved in since 9/11. That invokes a completely different mindset, nationally as well. We're seeing this playing out very vividly in Ukraine in terms of a national effort to support casualty evacuation and treatment, and that is our challenge in terms of our response and the advice we're giving the review team to ensure that we can meet the sorts of medical capability and capacity we need to meet the challenge you just discussed.
So it's right to say at the moment, I think, stands as serious shortcomings in terms of medical support.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, thank you very much. Jesse Norman, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Perm Secretary, I just want to come back to points that have been made on the equipment plan, and obviously you'll be fully aware of the importance of disclosure and transparency and the worries that we've had about diminishing transparency and disclosure. Do you reflect on, how much do you care about the concern about consent and preparedness across the wider political world if we don't have transparency in the way that might be regarded as it's certainly worse than it was in the past and certainly well short of optimal now?
Look, I think it's really important for two reasons. Firstly, if I sort of build on my previous remarks about deterrence, I mentioned in passing actually national resilience is part of that, and that's not just about investment in infrastructure or how we're thinking about cyber or critical national infrastructure. It's as much about societal readiness for some of the potential challenges that we might face or the potential ways in which we might need to commit our armed forces in the future. And so finding a way of having a sensible dialogue with the public about the challenges we face, the responses we're making, without scaring the horses unnecessarily, is really important. I think that was part of the narrative that the CDS was looking to advance in his RISI speech. But it's also important because in the end, there is only so much money, as you know, that the government can raise through taxation or borrowing, and a spending review is an exercise in sort of collective cabinet prioritisation, and as I think the Chancellor made clear just a week or 10 days or so ago, decisions to spend more money on defence necessarily means that there's at least an opportunity cost or a direct impact on money that can be spent elsewhere. So we need to be able to make our case. That's both about the requirement, but also actually about building confidence that money that is allocated to defence will be spent in an effective, good value for money way. So getting it and doing something sensible with it are two sides of the same coin. But getting that debate going is really important.
Right,
and transparency with Parliament and with the public is part of that.
But scaring the horses, not scaring the horses unnecessarily, involves scaring them a bit. And so the question is this: when we had a Cold War on, which many people would say we were entering a new Cold War, defence spending on average was 5 to 7% of GDP. That wasn't a threat against the homeland in the way that we might have thought of in the Second World War. That was 50% of GDP in the Second World War. But 5 to 7%, we're at half that now. So when we have the argument now about 2.5%, we're actually arguing about, in part, the level of deterrence that prevents us from having to get to 5 to 7% type Cold War spend. Can we take it that that thinking is firmly embedded in the political conversations that you guys are inevitably having about budget trade-offs?
Yes, I think you can. And it's both that, but it's also actually, if you look at the economic impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if you imagine what the economic impact of a conflict of whatever nature over Taiwan, I'm speculating,
sure.
There might be that the relative investment in not only defence but national security, in deterrence, to avoid some of those wider economic consequences is a case that makes itself quite relevant.
If we think about Ukraine, obviously the NEO has pointed out that we provided £2.7 billion of military equipment from existing stocks, but we've only agreed £1 billion of replenishment. Does that mean we don't think that needs replenishing, or we're planning to replenish it over a much longer basis than would be ideal for those stocks? Or what does that actually mean? Are we going to have to think about 9 years of further backfilling before we get to where we are
I
now?
might look to my colleagues to the left who are both setting the requirement and then buying.
So the simple answer is we've gifted a whole bunch of kit that is keeping them in the fight now. We've replaced the most important stocks, particularly in terms of munitions. So we've got contracts that have increased our production rates of ammunition and increased the stock holdings of complex weapons. But there is no doubt that we need to factor in the fact we've gifted that kit into our longer range equipment plan, which is what General McGowan spends his life doing. We're not. You cannot for the big equipment that we've given, the tanks, the armoured vehicles, etc. You cannot simply go shopping for that. You have to have programmes for that, and it will take time. So we've had to factor that into the longer-term programme.
And can we take it that the MoD has, and what lessons has it learned in relation to the inadequacies of PFI? Because obviously there have been very significant concerns, even in areas where you had replicable programme capability rather than, as it were, exquisite one-offs, that you had inadequate risk transfer, loss of control, loss of transparency, that it was essentially a financial fudge, which, doesn't do anyone any good ultimately. It's still debt that has to be paid. Is that something that you'd say you've really thought through and are incorporating into the new work that you're doing?
So we are looking at how might we take some of the benefits from the PFIs that went right, and a number of PFIs did go right when they're properly constructed, well thought through, when there's good third-party revenue and there's good opportunity to use underlying industry efficiencies. Those kind of arrangements can be advantageous, but there were also some very good examples where they weren't.
Right. And
so we're currently looking at whether or not there is applicability for the forward programme. No decisions made at all, and we're still in the foothills of looking at those kind of options. So really early days.
Okay, thank you for the clarity of that response. Ms. Blackmore, NAO recently criticised processes from the MoD about identifying and reporting losses in 22.3 and 3.4. Have you fixed the problem? What was the problem, and as you see it, and have you fixed it?
Yes, so let me start by saying the annual audit process is always a really helpful process for us in the department. We continue...
Can we all enjoy the word helpful?
Yes, continue to improve our controls. And it was very welcome for us to receive an unqualified opinion from the NAO for the second year running. That's followed very extensive work done in the department and with the NAO to be able to assure the accounts to that position. As you rightly note, the NAO raised an issue with regards to how we reported and disclosed our losses in the accounts. I can confirm that their issue was resolved prior to the publication. Very briefly, the issue that they raised had two constituent parts. The first was in relation to the clarity of the delegations from HMT to MoD. We have worked with HMT to update the delegation letters to improve the clarity and ensure that all relevant teams in the department are aware of that. The second issue that the NAO raised was in relation to how we disclosed the losses in our accounts, and not how we accounted for them, but the disclosures of the losses. The issue essentially arose because we changed our policy 2 years ago on the recommendation of the NAO. We used to report our losses only once the final loss was known, and that can actually take some time for all sorts of reasons. We changed the policy so that we reported our loss at the same time that we accounted for the loss. And what occurred, and the NAO pointed out, was in a small number of areas the department was operating under the old policy. That has been resolved by talking to all of the relevant accounting teams, and we took the opportunity to increase clarity in our internal guidance in that as well.
Okay, great. So we can expect that kind of rapid remedial action in relation to further disclosure of information on equipment, etc., obviously filling the gap that we've described earlier about loss of disclosure, loss of transparency?
So absolutely. So the policy we have in place now is when we account for the losses, which is when the decision is made, we will report the disclosure of those losses in the accounts. I mean, I would just say the old policy was not to delay the disclosure or around transparency. It was to be able to give a final value of the loss, which can actually change over time as we go through the process.
Yes, I'm just joining the dots and want to be sure that we're all completely on the same side on that, because obviously, you can't have an organisation spending the level of cash that you're spending without escalating interest as the money goes up and as the war fighting capability starts to come under question. And so I just want to reinforce that point. And if you're getting to a world where you can get a clear level of accounts without having a process for reporting losses, that's itself slightly unnerving.
So just to clarify, we absolutely had a policy on how we would report our losses. Said the issue occurred because a small number of areas were reporting under the old policy, which we'd had for many years, but we had updated it recently on the advice of the NAO.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, DG Finance, for your remarks. I'd also like to place on record the committee's gratitude to the NAO for all of their input, and in particular my personal gratitude to the Comptroller and Auditor General who talked me through the various aspects of this. But no doubt the committee will be coming back to certain topics, especially some of the retrospective work that's happened on that. But I'd now like to move on to Ian Room, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to bring us back to the personnel aspect. And Mr. Williams, the MoD over the last 3 years have spent £1.2 billion on temporary staff. Put that in context, that would deliver all the upgrades and new buildings that my hospital needs in my constituency. Just last year, 23-24, you spent £459 million on temporary staff and consultancy staff. Do you have a plan to reduce this figure, and how will you achieve it without losing any capabilities?
I wonder whether I might look to either Mr. Stark to talk about the approach that's been taken in DNS, which is a good example of the approach that we're looking at more generally. And then if you need some capping comments, either Ms Blackmore or I will fill in.
So the first comment is, why do we have temporary staff at all? And the answer is because programs move around, demands move around, having permanent staff of all of those competencies and skill sets would be fiscally inefficient. So you have to have some level of temporary staff. Having said that, we've worked really hard to get that down as far as we can. And over the last year, within DNS, we've roughly halved that number. We've gone down from 957 to 5 something. So we can get after it with some really focused effort, and that's what we have been doing. I think there is an irreducible minimum below which it becomes inefficient. So it's important to recognise that if you had 0 temporary staff, either you would be holding programmes up and therefore having lots of consequences, knock-on costs because you can't get stuff done, or you'd be holding large amounts of staff who are sitting around waiting for work, and that would be really fiscally irresponsible. So there will always be some, but we need to get it down to the right kind of level. What we're trying to do is to make sure our overall workforce planning modelling, firstly within DNS but more widely in defence, is as accurate as we can make it. The more accurate you can make it, the tighter you can manage that number. The other, you spoke to consultancy, so I just may speak to that for a minute. There are skills that are just not good value for us to have in-house. And therefore we use specialists outside to come in and provide that skill set when we need it. You also need people who are able to provide a clear and independent view. So some level of consultancy and advice will always be better value. Similar to temporary staff, we've got to get it down to the irreducible minimum. And again, that's down to good workforce planning and being strategic, and we're trying to do that.
So how are you? What's the long-term solution? What is it? What have you got planned? What can you share with us? How are you actually going to?
So within the DNS piece, we're kind of getting to the sort of level we'd want to be at long term, I think, as in the point at which is optimal value. I'm going to try to get it down just a little bit more if I can. The long-term solution is you make as accurate workforce planning as you can, which is about having very good modern tools for workforce planning, and across the department we're modernising our overall IT suite to allow us to do that. And then just to accept the fact that there will always be an irreducible number of workforce substitutes if we're going to be fiscally efficient. And the challenge that you will always give, that you should necessarily give us, is to put us on the spot and say, is the number right? And I would say in my organisation, which is roughly 11,500 people, we're now running at roughly 500 people of workforce subs. I can probably get it down a bit more, but probably not much further.
Thank you very much. Permanent Secretary, you'll be aware that prior to the election, the previous Defence Committee inquired extensively into the experiences of women and some of the abhorrent behaviour that they unfortunately, very, very sadly, had to experience. The committee did not, however, look into the practices or behaviour or culture within the ministry itself. Now, there have been serious allegations since last year of a toxic culture, including widespread harassment of women within the ministry. So what is being done to improve workplace culture in the department?
Chair, thank you. I think you're referring, particularly, although maybe not uniquely, to a letter that was sent to me and one of our non-executive directors by 60 or so senior women in the Ministry of Defence about their sort of collective experiences. And I'm really grateful to them for the courage they've shown in raising those issues, the kind of behaviour that they've highlighted, the sort of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, indeed actually a range of some of the sort of smaller, if I might say it, sort of micro behaviours have no part in defence no part in the armed forces in the Ministry of Defence at all. We launched a programme we're calling Raising Our Standards, and that's done a number of things over the past year, and I can talk a bit about sort of priorities for the year ahead. So we have sort of fundamentally reviewed our civil service complaints procedure and how, actually this is not just civil service but across the armed forces as well, how we promote and support people to raise concerns. There's been sort of strong leadership engagement. In the end, this is quite a lot of a leadership challenge in my view, both in when sort of senior leadership in the department comes together as being an issue that we sort of work through, think about the approaches that we need to take, but also making a direct link in future to performance appraisal. We've set up an external challenge panel to advise us on the approach that we're taking, and we've also been leaning into work in the single services. So you will have seen as well recently the report into culture in the Royal Navy's submarine service, for example, and the sort of cultural blueprint that that the Royal Navy has set out. For the year ahead, from a sort of personal perspective, I think we need to have a really clear focus on behaviours, including actually reinforcing the positive behaviours that we want to see. And that's both a leadership challenge, but it's also about how each individual in the department shows up, how they treat their colleagues around them. There's a degree of individual responsibility here as well. We've got to get better data and evidence about the incidents, how complaints are dealt with, how quickly they're dealt with, and be more open, I think, in the sanctions that then apply. We, using both the developments in the service justice system, and that sort of flows on from this committee's work around women in the armed forces, but also our kind of beefing up of civil service casework, make it absolutely clear that we are taking concrete and decisive action to deal with unacceptable behaviour where we find it. And then finally, there's a focus for me on education and training, so that at key points in individuals' careers, are we really making sure that we're getting these messages hammered home. So I think we know what we need to do. I think progress over the past year has been slower than I would like, and that's a message we are getting both from the external challenge panel and indeed from members of staff. But for me, I think this is a priority area for us in 2025 to build on the work we've done with a particular focus on the services, to build on the challenge from committees like this one, to make sure that we are picking up the lived experience of civil servants in the department, not just from sort of a gender perspective or issues of sexual harassment, but sweeping in our race action plan, for example, our approach to disability. So it's a single programme, and just being really relentless about our expectations of the behaviours that we want in the kind of organisation that we want to lead.
I'm glad that concrete action is going to be taken. General, sorry, you wanted to come in on this particular point?
20 seconds on that. And I think, from what Mr. Williams said, I'm typical of those senior leaders where we feel very strongly about this, in regular touch with the two women who led that letter, and that is exactly why we held a Women in Defence conference yesterday in Main Building, over 300 people there. We went through the issues that you discussed, that Mr. Williams has discussed, and plotted a path into 2025. So that letter remains live, and senior, there were 4 people on that panel.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's being taken seriously and concrete action will be taken. I'm also aware, Permanent Secretary, that in May 2024, Prospect and 2 other trade unions, the civil service trade unions, wrote asking for an independent inquiry. I won't delve further into that particular aspect given the lack of time, but suffice it to say that the committee is expecting to hold a follow-up evidence session in March of next year, so in 3 months' time, and this is very much a call to those who would like to give evidence to the committee. But finally, I'd like to bring in Ms. Scholes-Croggan, please.
And again, I'm aware of the time, so very briefly, does the MoD have a standardised approach for assessing the social impact for communities and the defence contracts? And if so, what have been the findings of such analysis?
Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, can do. I was just trying to find the stats. But the answer is yes. We have the government has a standardised approach to social value and social value scoring, which has a minimum of 10% on any bid associated with, from memory, 5 factors. Within defence, we tend to focus on 3, which is economic equality, inequality, climate change, and equal opportunity. We can go as high as 20% and have done, particularly when we recognise their critical national capabilities, such as the National Shipbuilding Strategy and the Land Industrial Strategy. There are suggestions that we should go further and amend the way that social value is looked at. There have been a series of recommendations from a number of different sources into the SDR, so I know that they're under consideration.
And if I may, again, back to the statement of intent on the Defence Industrial Strategy, one of those lenses is very definitely about how we use our buying power to spread prosperity, how we build partnerships with industry and with local areas, and of course our Barrow plan, jointly with our partners in government, with BA Systems and with local authorities in Barrow, is a good example of one particular approach that we can take.
That was something of big importance for me, that we noticed that within that community we've got very much the haves and the have-nots. So how are you assessing how it works to deliver that value?
Yeah, and I think that's how we do that assessment. For me, is something that we want to work through, building on the approach that Mr. Stark has set out through the work to set out our new defence industrial strategy.
Thank you very much. My sincere apologies, Mr. Stark. We didn't quite get into your war readiness, war games, but no doubt you will explain things over to the likes of myself over a cuppa at some later stage, and you are more than welcome to submit a written note to the committee. Indeed, I'm very, very grateful to all of your good selves for taking out your valuable time to inform not just the committee, but I think also the wider public debate and opinions regarding these important matters. I'm very, very grateful also for your notes about sending notes, as well as the classified private sessions, which we will definitely take up your offer, General, on that. Thank you very much. Order, order.